I'm Michael Bane, and welcome to the Best Defense Survival Roundtable. Of course, with Michael Janich, Mike Seeklander, Rob Pincus, and Dr. William Aprill. This is, parenthetically, our last hour-long weekly roundtable. We always plan to go to the end of May, but that's not the end of the Best Defense. What we're going to do is take the month of June and retool, and then the first week of July, we're going to come back with a 30-minute version of the Best Defense. It will be on weekly, and we hope you will be joining us then. Guys, it's interesting. We've kind of gone through an epidemic together. If you think of where we were back at the beginning, and we didn't know anything, and it's fair to say nobody knew anything. But more than anything else, I think we've gotten through this. I saw you nodding your head, Mr. Seeklander. What do you think?
It is. It's really surreal. It's strange that we've been doing this, and there's a point where we're all kind of on lockdown. We really didn't know anything. We didn't know what we didn't know. I still think we don't know what we don't know. But it's I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and I certainly don't think any of this was spun initially politically. I'm not saying it hasn't had some political implications, but the way I feel when I look around, I'm kind of like, is this real? Did this really happen? Or did Michael Bane just pull me into this to practice a pandemic discussion board for a few weeks? And maybe the blooper's on me. I'm not sure, because it just doesn't feel like we've been through it. I know people have died and certainly have gotten very, very sick, and my heart is out to them. But it's really weird for me.
Well, as I mentioned, I went to a restaurant last night and had dinner. I mean, food and alcoholic beverages, and a waitress waited on us, and we had friends with us, and none of us were wearing masks, and it was truly an odd feeling, if you will. And Rob, we talked a little bit last week, Rob, that Mr. Pincus, that you had done this class in New York State. You had medical professionals there. So it's been a week. It's been a little longer than a week. What are the results? What happened, Rob?
Yeah, well, the class went great. We actually ran 2 sessions. As you said, they were supervised after consultation with medical professionals right there who've been working in New York City, the epicenter. One of the guys that was there actually supervising us, he's a good friend of mine. He's a student. He lost 11 staff members at his hospital, 5 good friends, including the guy that was the head of the ICU at their hospital. He's been consulting with the federal government, the state government, as well as all the private practices in the city hospitals. And I can't think of literally a more experienced professional. His expertise was airway trauma before coronavirus, and he's been on the front lines. And he helped coach us through what we thought were the best practices and the best way to get through training. And as I always say, like, safety third. If we weren't going to train, there wasn't a risk of transmission of virus while training. But we wanted to train. We wanted to open an indoor range. We did that. We ran 2 sessions. People can go out and Google and look at the links. There's all kinds of articles out there. AmmoLand wrote a great one. John Crump did a great interview. Cam Edwards did a great interview. You can hear the details of it. But here's the thing. Now we are, 15. We're at 14 days past my arrival in New York. So we're at 14 days since the end of the class. And I've kept in touch with, obviously, the range staff and several of the students that were there. No symptoms. No one's come down with a fever, come down with a cough, come down with the coronavirus. Well, if you go out and look at my interviews, I admitted, the few days after that, we may very well find out that we all end up getting coronavirus from that event, that maybe somebody's family member would get hospitalized or, worst case scenario, die. And one of the things I said is, this is the business I'm in, not to be flippant about it or not to make it seem slight, but if I don't accept that when I go to the range every single day a student may get shot, then I probably shouldn't be running that range. And so we'd run this new risk with coronavirus, but we ran it successfully. The docs that were there were some EMTs there, the staff, everybody. And believe it or not, the New York State government nor the local government, none of them cracked down on the range. They said, they really didn't have much to say. It looks like you guys did something responsible. You did it safely, and we're going to let it go. So it was very happy to say that it was run successfully. And I disagree a little bit just in feeling with Mike. For me personally, I know that there's definitely a change, right? I canceled my entire spring training tour there definitely was a lot of effect on my life directly, as well as the lives of friends and family and extended, collaborators. But now coming out of it, it sort of feels like, is it really over? Or are we just deciding that even though it's still going on, we have to move forward? And I tend to find myself more in that mindset.
I think that's very well put. Dr. Aprill, just something you mentioned before we went on the air. You went outside, you're in New Orleans, you went to cross the street, and you saw something absolutely amazing, and I think it's called traffic.
Yeah, it was a little odd to see traffic, especially after dark, because people have been tending to roll up the sidewalks here. And as the city has reopened, we're seeing more normal, natural rhythms of life, and that's good. But I think it also points out that the worst case predictions for what would happen when we're reopening, which resulted in the governor of the state of Georgia being accused of being a mass murderer, literally, for opening the state, those worst case scenarios haven't even begun to come true. There were some certainly, silly things done in Georgia, especially with misrepresentation of the numbers. But the fact is, there's not an explosion of cases following behind these states that are reopening. In fact, in some cases, the 7-day floating average of new cases is dropping. And I think it's fair enough for critics on both sides to admit when they're wrong, that reopening can be done safely. And frankly, it is being done safely. That doesn't mean it's being done perfectly, but it means we're learning all the while and doing the best we can every day.
Well, I think, when we started this, one of the things that we said, I think, by the second show is there needs to be a fundamental understanding that a model is a fluid thing. A model exists until you have real data, and then you put the real data in, and the model shifts with that. And we have, our leaders, if you will, have been a little slow to look at the model and say, this is a beautiful model, but it's no longer corresponding to reality. Maybe we should try something else.
Well, there's a real problem in that, there's a lot of criticism lately about what's called the death of expertise, and I agree. There is a fundamental mistrust of expertise that at its worst sounds like, well, he's just smarty pants, what does he know? But there's also a flip side danger, which is presuming that an expert is always right. Well, a real expert knows that that's why we carve models on paper and not in stone. And I think, experts are people too, and people are subject to fears, and sometimes numbers can be made bigger to get attention, where the large number makes you pay attention to me, and then if I'm wrong, aren't we all relieved? But that also has an erosive effect. It makes us mistrust our experts. So I think our experts have some skin in the game too, and it would help if they were a little more judicious along the way.
Mr. Janich, you were talking a little bit before we went on the air about the Argentinian cruise ship, which is, cruise ships are basically wonderful petri dishes for testing reality, because you got a lot of people locked in a place where they're eating together, they're breathing the same air. Could you kind of step our viewers through that?
Yeah, it was an article I saw, it was Time Magazine, it was actually yesterday that it came out, late yesterday. And what was interesting about it is they went through all the protocols and everything as far as trying to be as diligent as possible. And what they found was that several days into the cruise, some people started to show symptoms of COVID-19. They ended up testing people. What they found was out of the 217 people on board, 128 tested positive, but only 24 of those people showed symptoms prior to being tested. So what you have is the remaining 104 people, 81%, who tested positive, didn't experience any symptoms. So, like you were saying with the models are based on taking what has happened before and how do we take that and try to essentially kind of project, given the current situation, which models are applicable. And we try to extrapolate from that. Well, when you have something that we really don't understand, we don't have enough information, we've been kind of filling in the blanks this entire time as we go. And I consider something like this, when you look at cruise ships, when you look at prisons, when you look at any other kind of captive population, you've got some really interesting statistical models that I think can be really revealing, and it also really sobering. If you think about it, you say, okay, if 80% of the people who have COVID potentially, again, we're kind of extrapolating from a single situation. But if we look at that, we say 80% of the people are asymptomatic, or, we talked a little bit before about when you consider that, the idea that, well, maybe you don't feel your best, but you don't certainly feel sick, so it doesn't register that you're profoundly sick. That, first of all, statistically skews things tremendously. When you look at the number of people that could potentially be sick out there, it could be far more than what we currently think. And then what you also have is now a situation where the number of people who are contagious are also far more than you think. So even the idea of, hey, I'm going to take this person's temperature, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, you're trying to do due diligence based on what we think we know, but you don't know what you don't know. That's the scary part.
Well, we come back to when we began here, we were talking about, and I'm, again, agreeing with Mike Seeklander, every person's death is a horrible thing. But, when we began these roundtables, we were talking between 2 and 4% death rate. And now after, 2.5, 3 months, CDC is saying somewhere between 0.26% and 0.4% death rate, which I know this lights people up, but if you're comparing to, a similar disease, that's a bad influenza year. We've seen 0.26 influenza years. So it's, I think what we don't know about the virus is pretty substantial, but I do think, I think it's with us forever. I mean, it's in the herd now. It's endemic, it's endemic in the herd, which means we kind of go forward. I am concerned about, example, the Staten Island case, where a woman not wearing a mask is chased out by other people wearing masks, that there's a kind of this simmering violence of people who are just tired of being isolated. We are herd. We are tribal. The great apes are not solitary creatures, and they don't take it very well. Dr. Aprill, I mean, where are we on that? How close are we to things boiling over?
Well, when you think about crises in the past, and there's a lot of literature about this, crises in the past that do bring people together. I mean, think of the response to 9/11, things like that. What's missing here is that element of human contact. Think about the Blitz in London. People were isolated from the Blitz, but they were isolated together, and that was the main point. And now we're in a very tough situation where what we're saying, the best thing you can do for your fellow man is to stay away from them. Well, that violates one of our strongest instincts called herding. Herding is a very powerful drive in us. It's how we feel safe. That's how we establish connection. And to take that away is a really unique sort of stressor. And it doesn't surprise me at all that it stresses people at their weakest points. And I think it can lead to a kind of pathological bonding, as you saw in the clip from the store, which is now suddenly people feel righteous and good in banding together to stone a heretic, somebody who refuses to wear a mask. That's the flip side of herding, is that it can go bad really quickly. And I wonder about that specific clip. What would have happened if the woman had just said, well, you're wearing a mask and that's good. I'm not wearing a mask and that's good. And I'm going to keep shopping. Thank you very much. At one point, would somebody have hit her in the back of the head with a can of peas? That's the kind of thing that I think is never going to go away as a fear in my mind.
And that's the important point here, is that stoning heretics is a long tradition in the human race. It goes back to our very beginnings, Somebody's from the other tribe, kill them, eat them. Mr. Pincus, Rob, you were saying a little earlier, just to pick up on something you were saying there, is the concept of going forward. How do we go forward at the same time we're sitting on a pressure cooker?
Well, I think that's the key, right, is moving forward should be releasing some of that pressure. I mean, letting people go to restaurants. And I went to my restaurant, or went to a restaurant for the first time about 2 weeks ago for a late breakfast right in downtown St. Augustine, right on the bayfront there. And it was different, right? Plexiglass dividers and the mask on the waitress, and the hand sanitizer all over the place. Last night's the first time I went out for a dinner at a place over here in Durango, Colorado, and it was just they had it set up, I think, much better, right? More distance, again, masks on the servers. They had 2 different servers helping each table. And they were, one was food, one was drink. So they were able to isolate those areas, and they had disposable menus. I think we're going to get better at this. And as we as a society get better at it, and I know people hate it, you know, I even put it in quotes with my post that we were doing this show as the teaser, new normal. And I have to put it in quotes right now, but I don't know why. I guess I do. There's a narrative and there's a political agenda that new normal is bad, right? And I think we, as a culture, we have this false nostalgia that the past was always better. Not necessarily the case. Was it better when we could have full restaurants and not worry about coronavirus? Yes. Is it going to be better if we go back to not worrying about coronavirus right now and have full restaurants? Probably not. So I'm okay with new normal, just like cell phones are a new normal, Zoom meetings are a new normal. You know, we have seatbelts are a new normal, smoking being, you know, ostracizing you socially instead of being inclusive socially in most parts of the Western world. That's new normal. New normals aren't all bad. And I think we need to get over the political idea of that and move forward in a way that embraces being able to move forward. And that's what's going to relieve that pressure faster than anything else.
That's a point. I mean, but it's hard to get past the political. You know, I use Colorado as an example because I think I live here, and it's a very good example. The reopening of Colorado is being based on a model created at the University of Colorado, which is not a school well known for its public health. In fact, it's not in the list of 200 top universities in public health. What it's known for is its politics. And so the governor is operating the state on a model created at a university that doesn't know anything about public health by people who know a lot about politics. And when asked directly, could we see the model? He said no. It's hard to get past the politics of, I have a secret plan. Secret plans are always bad. They never work. I mean, D-Day worked. That may be the last secret plan on Earth that worked. But Mr. Seeklander, if we look a little bit at this violent aspect, the stoning of heritage aspects, we got our audience out there, and the audience. How does the audience parse this? How do they come up with a plan? Which I kind of brought up a little bit on Facebook. Is you got to have how are you going to deal with this? You go in the store, and let's say you're not wearing a mask. The store doesn't require a mask, and in Colorado, only certain counties require a mask. It's not consistent across the state at all. Mr. Seeklander, how do you start planning? How do you talk to your kids about this? It's like, we're going to go in there. We're not necessarily going to be wearing a mask. People start screaming at us. Where are the lines that you need to put on the ground there?
Well, I think, you know, we've taught it before, you know, awareness that people are giving me this hinky look, and avoidance. I mean, I'm not going to get into a situation where I have to defend myself or my family because someone's pissed off that I didn't wear a mask. And by the way, I personally, I'm not against the mask wearing, but I'm going to say this bluntly. I think a lot of it's a bunch of baloney in the aspect of, I'll give you a great example. There are some things and some protocols in place that make all the sense in the world. Like Dr. Aprill said, things that we can probably utilize to dramatically reduce flu and viral infections from a variety of, you know, for the long term that will probably save potentially thousands of lives. But there are also some things that irritate me, you know, that I personally feel are completely foolish. I mean, I've been to a restaurant 4 or 5 times now, more than that. By the way, full disclosure, I've also been rolling around the map in my BJJ place training MMA. And here's the deal. That's my choice, right? Because
your body, your choice.
One of two choices. You don't do shit forever for the rest of your life, or you start doing some things. And there are certain things that just don't work. And in the restaurants, there's some plexiglass covers. That all makes sense. The contactless payments, especially in fast food delivery, a lot of those things I think are brilliant. They're great. We should move forward with all of that stuff. But in the restaurant, you can watch the service. Yeah, they don't wear masks until they walk literally past the spot that everybody's seated, and they do what everybody's going to do, what humans are going to do. They're lifting, they're doing this. So come on, folks, here's the bottom line. It's endemic. If it's around forever, which it's going to be, you're probably going to be exposed to it. It's going to happen. Should we prevent it? Or if you are at a high risk factor, should you maybe continue to quarantine to an extent and follow all protocols for the next year until, medical treatment and staff is ready to receive you and treat you if you do catch it. But here's the bottom line. It's going to creep into it's like saying, you know what, I'm never going to get the flu. So I'm going to wear a mask and I'm going to use hand sanitizer and I'm never going to get the flu again. It's complete bullshit. It's not going to work out. Sorry, that's my point.
No, that's absolutely right.
No.
Dr. Aprill?
Well, I think Michael's absolutely right. Folks need to carry forward their sense of their status. If you're an immunocompromised person with lots of secondary conditions, you're going to need to be really, really careful for a really, really long time. That doesn't mean you can expect the rest of the world to warp around you to make that everyone's new normal. These are individual concerns and need to be addressed individually, not with a giant cookie cutter.
That's a very good point. And I've worn a mask through most of this because I felt in a higher risk group. I am less concerned with that now because I was a numbers guy. And I look at the numbers guy. I look at a disease that at this point is endemic, and I look at however many, the 400 cases across Colorado, and we don't even know how many are active cases right now. I'm like, I'm conceivably more likely to get hit by summer lightning, which we've been having a lot of here in the mountains, than I am to come across its risk. But I come back to the if I come back very much to that line for people who are pro-choice, which is my body, my choice.
Well, it's a little different in that this is infectious, right?
Yeah.
I can tell you, going forward, some changes of mine. I am infinitely more assiduous about my hands. I clean and sterilize my hands way more than I was a few months ago. I'm not even gonna lie. And frankly, when I go into a commercial establishment where I can't rigorously maintain a pretty fair amount of distance, I wear a mask, and I can see that going forward for a good long time.
That's a good one.
I don't feel crazy.
Mr. Janich, I mean, there's an issue there where I know that your wife is with diabetes and in a high risk group. So I know you're paying very, very close attention to as we move forward. What do you think of that on Dr. Aprill's point that maybe a mask culture becomes something we do live with if we're going to be crammed together?
I think it makes perfect sense. One of the things we've talked about all along has been that idea of just like defending against any other threat, what you have to do is consider your personal vulnerability. So just like self-defense, if you have some type of a physical handicap where you can't run away from something, then that takes away one of your options to be able to avoid a problem. It defines what your responses will be as an individual. And it basically defines what your tactics should be to be able to keep yourself safe. And the same thing applies here. One of the things, though, that is difficult with this whole thing is we have the whole concept of freedom. And we're all patriotic. We all believe in freedom. One of the things that I think, especially when it comes to different establishments and stuff like that, we do know that COVID can be spread through germs that end up on a surface. So when you think about that, you may say, I'm going to walk into this business. I don't need to wear a mask. I don't need to care about this thing. I can sneeze and spit and spew everywhere I want to go. And that's my freedom. That's my right. Well, that business is still private property. So as far as respecting their rules as private property, that's one thing I think people need to be concerned about. And then respecting the other people who, you may decide, I'm not going to wear a mask. Whatever happens, happens. Okay, great. Again, you're defining that for your own individual choice. But you're also, through your behavior, potentially defining it for a lot of other people. And I think, like so many things, if we were simply more considerate and respectful of the broad scope of what our actions might do, if we simply think through that, that goes a long way. So when people talk about, hey, we're all in this together, yeah, we're tired of hearing that too, just like we're tired of hearing about the new normal. But realistically, that's true. If you were the last person to go up and use the keypad, to pay for something in a supermarket, and you might be asymptomatic, but you left COVID on the keypad, and now somebody comes up right behind you, and it's that old lady, and she's immunocompromised, that has profound effect. And it's it's a lot of shit to think about is the problem. And so many people just want to be done with it, but it really is something that is a lot more complicated than we want it to be. So as we move forward, again, the best thing that we all can do, as we kept saying all along, is think about what you need to do to keep yourself and your loved ones safe. Because we keep coming back to it, you're on your own. And you can't expect the rest of the world, like you say, to create this bubble around you. You have to be able to do what's in your best interest.
Yep. Rob, expanding on something that both Mike and Dr. Aprill Williams said. Dr. Aprill said, boy, I'm really more conscious of washing my hands. I'm really more conscious of other people's surfaces. Now that I've had, 2 months, 3 months of having disinfectant quality cleaning pads and tissues and things like that in the car, in every car, and with me all the time, I'm now very aware of the times I touch things that have been touched by a lot of people, if that makes sense. Banister rails, doors, things like that. And I find myself now almost approaching a reflexive. I get back in the car, I take out the tissue or the hand wipe that's disinfectant, that will kill the viruses, and I find myself wiping my hands, wiping the car door, wiping the steering wheel, wiping the knob. I think that's actually a good thing, Rob. I mean, I think maybe we should have been doing that all along.
Yeah, I do it pretty constantly. I'm with Janich and Dr. Aprill, I guess, as far as the face covers and the masks. I'm wearing them when I go into stores. Wear them into the restaurant. I sit down, I take them off. I just went into a coffee shop here, wore it in. Gave my order with it. I was ordering some coffee for some other people. I got mine first. I sat down at the table, took it off, drank, put it back on, got the other coffees and left. And then when I got to deliver them, I had like this crisis moment. I think I talked a few weeks ago about the death of chivalry. Like I didn't know if I was allowed to pick something up that a woman dropped in front of me. And I was kind of in that same mode. Like, and then we had hand sanitizer at the location where some people were working on editing a video, and I was bringing their coffee back. So we just, I hand sanitized, and they did individually before they picked up the cup. So one of the interesting things that happened a couple weeks ago, I've been traveling around a lot with toddler Pincus. She's going to be 5 in a few weeks. We went on, at one point I came up to the Western headquarters apartment in Denver, and for some reason, I guess I had the hand sanitizer in my hand or whatever. It ended up in the apartment, the one bottle that I had been keeping in the truck. We went out on a drive somewhere. We went to a store. We got back in, and our ritual is when we get back in, we hit the hand sanitizer, and I do the same thing with the steering wheel and my phone usually too. I'll hit the phone with the hand sanitizer and let it sit there and get it pretty wet, right? And because there is a duration time you need to make that work. And she was, that's her new normal. It wasn't 10,000 repetitions. It wasn't, 10,000 hours. It wasn't 20 years of repetition, 5 minutes a day. She became an expert in when we get back in the car, in just the portion of the last couple of months that she's been with me traveling, that we use hand sanitizer. And so much so that I stopped at a gas station, a few miles down the road or whatever. I had to run in and I grabbed some new hand sanitizer to put in the truck because I didn't want to disrupt, for her, this learning curve that she had obviously picked up on, that this is part of what we do, again, going back to that new normal phrase. So I'm fine with it. I don't think that's a problem. I actually put up a video back in March, like washing hands, from 1972 to February of 2020, and it was like black and white, but it was like 10 seconds. And then I spent the 25 seconds, really washing and doing the nails and doing the back of the hand. Do I do that every single time? No, but I am using hand sanitizer a lot, and I am wearing a face cover.
Well, when I started traveling seriously, and I know all of us travel seriously, but when I got to a point where I'm looking at, say, 120, 150 nights a year, 160 nights a year out, I became obsessive about washing my hands because I got tired of getting sick on the road. And ironically, I mean, it's not that you're likely to get the disease on the plane from their circulation system. They have HEPA filters on the airplane. Yeah, you can get sick from the baby coughing on your necks. But once I started washing my hands constantly, all of a sudden, all those viruses that you pick up on the road that I sort of took as the cost of doing business, of traveling at that level, disappeared. Like, what a shock. What a shock. Now, Dr. Aprill, maybe what we should be thinking about here is trying to come up with I sort of say a model, but I'll be struck dead by God if I said a model. But a model in which we say, well, we know when we need a mask. I'm feeling under the weather. I really should wear a mask because I don't want to infect, that's the blunt trauma. Or we say, I'm going to be packed. I got to get on a New York City subway. Not only do I want an N95 mask, but I'd like an environmental protection suit on that point. But we should just get used to using the tools.
Well, I think a better word is schema. Model is dying a painful death right before our eyes, but schema is good because schema is a combination of a prediction and anticipation. So I like to think of a schema in which I operate in a world that is trying to infect me. I've had jobs, especially contract jobs, working with the children on joint military bases. And these are kids with weaponized germs from all over the world. And no matter how much hand washing was done, the kids were all over us. Just, kids are little touching machines. And so for the first couple of months of every school year, every staff member was sick as hell and nothing you could do about it. So we've been subject to that kind of environment, and I certainly don't want to be in the future. So my model for myself is, what do I need to do for myself to stop this world that wants to infect me? And I need to pick the things that are going to give me the most juice for the fair amount of squeeze. Because in the end, it's my health. It's my morbidity and my mortality. And if I don't watch out for it, I'll get sick and die. And I don't want that. And so it brings us full circle to where the responsibility has gone out into the world, but then back into me to manage it.
Then how, and I'll just throw this out to whoever wants to raise their hand. I mean, how do we get past the political, and it's a legitimate, how do we get past the political road bump that we are at right now?
I have a general rule about it. The more quickly politics comes into play, the less likely the person is actually treating it as an existential threat. If we had a much worse mortality rate, let's say SARS or MERS, where 60% of the people getting this illness were dying from it, we wouldn't be talking politics. The fact that we're free to talk about politics is because the mortality rate has been so low. And I think people need to focus on how quickly and how quickly is making this political and cast a really askance upon them.
Mr. Seeklander.
No, I completely agree. That was very, very well put. Much better than I probably would have put. And the funny thing about that is we talked about this in 3 or 4 shows ago in terms of leadership. Had this been like a MERS or SARS or whatever else, and 40 or 50 or 60% of people were actually dying from it, hopefully, I would hope that we would have seen some of our politicians actually raised to leadership, to actually attempt to lead and maybe combine sources of information and bipartisan and give us true answers. I think that's one of the problems out there. In terms of the protection and how do you individually do it, Janich said it very well a second ago. He used the word respect. I think a lot of times in terms of wearing a mask and doing these things and opening a door and not touching a door and keeping your hands clean, these are all respectful things. I just wonder where the weak points are, in terms of, like you said, a plan in the future. What do we do? Well, the big things make sense. Why would we not wash our hands? I mean, unless you like the flu, wash your hands. If hand sanitizer, keeping your door handles clean. But a lot of those things I think are while they're intelligent, where is the chink in the armor? Like, for example, I have kids, and we finally said to our kids, you can have someone come stay the night. Or you can actually go stay the night. Because think about this. What's the alternative? Now, it's not 60 or 70% death rate. If it was, there'd be a large barbed wire perimeter right now. And I'd shoot anybody. But here's the bottom line.
Absolutely.
I got kids, so what am I going to do? Eventually, they need to live life a little bit. And I can't control what they're doing. So no matter how many times I wash my hands or how many people around me were wearing masks, when my kid walks in the house, if they were exposed to something, guess what? Seeklander family gets it. I think those are the real life things we need to work out and just be as smart and as safe as possible. It might prevent the flu, it might prevent COVID, but doing these things, I think, probably make a lot of sense. But the other thing I want to address real quickly is what a lot of people aren't looking at, like why are certain death rates so off in different countries? Well, you look at Japan and a lot of these cultures, they tend to be a lot leaner, a lot lighter, a lot healthier. They eat less. They're not
Morbidly obese?
Big fat Americans. I mean, come on. So yeah, you can wear a mask and do all these things, but how many days did you do cardio that week and spend working on your health or your fitness, or did you reduce your alcohol intake? Once again, they are all personal freedoms, you know. By the way, I did hear, and this is true of, I think, the Spanish flu and the previous pandemics, that whiskey kills the virus. Whiskey kills the virus. So I've personally taken my stance on that as something that I believe to be true. So,
Mr. Janich, I mean, which particular brands are Mr. Janich, would you suggest we stockpile in case of the next pandemic?
Ones that I don't drink.
It's, you know, when we started this, nobody was laughing at anything. There was no jokes that could be made because, you know, the idea of an epidemic, even at a 3 or 4% death rate, is a terrifying thing. And now we've kind of gotten, I think, as Dr. Aprill says, hey, we can discuss the politics of it because we're not stacking bodies on the side of the road. So it's what do we need to do going forward now?
Learn from it. You know,
learn from it, Doctor.
Learn from it. Hopefully, you know, morbidity and mortality is the concern, not what kind. Let's say, you know, if I survive COVID just by chance or by, you know, an effective lockdown procedure, but then I get a really severe case of the flu this year that winds up killing me, the regular, you know, run-of-the-mill flu, whatever the yearly edition is. I don't feel any less dead. And so to have something like this come that really rattled the cages and not harvest as much benefit as we can would be the ultimate waste. I mean, 100,000 deaths, which is what we're talking about, is a really, really monumental tragedy, but it's not a preventable one. So I think we can stop throwing blame around a little bit and start thinking about how do we manage these otherwise unavoidable tragedies.
Well, 100,000 people is a big number, but it's a 320 million country. And again, I mean, without sidetracking into the media, which is invested in panic because panic makes them money.
Well, you know, I think I'd hate to accidentally echo Stalin, who of course said, you know, one death is a tragedy, a million is a statistic. Each of these 100,000 deaths is somebody's grandma and somebody's son and somebody's wife and somebody's mom and somebody's dad. And that's an unimaginable tragedy and change in some people's lives. And we've got to take that seriously. We can also approach it from the big picture, but I think we need to be respectful of both ends.
Mr. Pincus?
Yeah, it's very real. Like I said, I have friends who've been very sick from this. I have friends who've lost family members. But here in the county that I'm sitting in, you know, the only death in the last 3 months has been a suicide. And obviously there's people asking the question about whether or not the lockdown, which was very severe in San Juan County and Silverton specifically, if that contributed to the depression. Now, there were ongoing issues and, you know, alcohol and other things, but people are asking that question. And there are businesses that have shut down here that won't reopen this season. And as I said, we tried to prove that we could run the train safely. If that train doesn't start running with passengers on it, there will be other businesses that close down this season here in Silverton, maybe not to reopen. And a town of 600 people can only afford to lose so many businesses before the whole town shuts down for, you know, another cycle, as sometimes happens, as those of you in Colorado know, in these mountain tourism towns. So we have to look at that big picture, and we cannot play the if it saves one life game. I think being sensitive and being respectful to the people that have suffered and the people that are suffering and the people that will continue to suffer from this is obviously important as humans. But as a culture, as a society, as a country, as states, as counties, as communities, we must navigate through this risk, and we must find the ways that reasonably mitigate it. I mean, I made the post, you know, 6 weeks ago that echoes what Seeklander saying. I'm going to get this, but because I'm traveling, and because my parents are in high risk groups, and because I don't want to not visit my family, because I don't want to not go to different parts of the world, and I don't want to not be around my daughter and not be around other people, I am wearing the mask. I am using the hand sanitizer. I am physically distancing. I am choosing as I go forward, I'm sure, to participate in events and go to restaurants and go to social activities that are being run in a way that is sensitive to the risk, because I'm better off. If I can go the next 10 years without ever having coronavirus, great. Because if I get it, and again, it's probably a when I get it, I'm probably passing this on to other people because of the lifestyle I lead. And I have to be able to put my head on the pillow at night knowing I'm doing what I can to mitigate and minimize those risks.
So once again, it comes down to, though, a willingness to use the tools in a non-political way. Again, I'm in a higher risk group. I wear a good mask. But at the same time, the hard issue for me to get past, and because I'm very political, as you guys know, is that a lot of these things I've heard before attached to guns. For example, if it only saves one life, how many times have those of us here heard that attached to guns? Well, if there were no guns, well, suppose we only save one child, or the common good. Would it kill you to give up your concealed carry permit for the common good? And my response in interviews for years as an activist has been, only if I get to define the common good. Because the problem is whoever defines the common good is going to define it not for the common good, but for their own good. So there's as soon as you hit me with something that I've argued now for the last 30 years on guns, and you apply it to masks or closings or any of that, my hackles stand on end. Mike Janich, you've dealt with me a long time. You know I'm a pain in the ass, but
you're good at it.
Those are true statements, though. We've heard this before.
Yeah, and again, when you look at it kind of in the broad scope of things, what you have are differences of opinion that are based on perceptions of personal freedom. And you have, you can sit down with somebody who is diametrically opposed to you as far as gun rights. And as long as you're both being civil and respectful, you can have great discourse. You can talk about advantages, disadvantages, pros, cons, all that kind of stuff. You can communicate with each other, walk away at the end of it, still disagree, but you had a lively conversation. Moving forward, communication and respect. I think those two elements, if we apply that to everything, we can do that the same way. We're not going to solve it. We're not going to define the common good as it applies to wearing masks or carrying guns or owning guns or anything else. That's not going to be, we're not going to have this sweeping black and white that is suddenly going to descend upon us and give us the rule book that we need or want. I don't think we do want it. But what we'll have, as long as we can, if you have somebody, again, going back to the COVID thing, I decide I don't want to wear a mask, and I walk into a business, and the business owner says, "Excuse me, we have a policy that we require all of our customers to wear masks." I don't know what his pre-existing conditions might be, or who he has in his family, or what else is going on, or maybe he just reopened his business because he had to close it down and have the entire thing disinfected because somebody could track their catching COVID-19 to the fact that they were present in that business and that business was associated with it. He suddenly, spent thousands and thousands of dollars to disinfect his business. Now he's reopening and he's like, you know what? I'm not going to let this happen again. There's a lot of things we don't know about the individuals that we deal with and the businesses that we deal with. So simply being a little bit understanding, being respectful, and saying, okay, cool, your business, your rules, I'll either abide by it and wear the mask while I'm here, or I'll choose to go somewhere else. But the idea that it's my constitutional right to come into your private property and do things my way, that's bullshit. And it doesn't serve anyone's good. And this is the type of stuff where if we allow that to precipitate, that's where we start ending up with creeping more and more towards the civil disobedience and the civil unrest and all that type of thing. Just chill the hell out, and simply say, look, I'm going to be respectful. If I don't like your rules, I'll go play somewhere else. I'll go shop somewhere else. I think it's fairly straightforward. That's the message that we need to reinforce.
I think that's very well put. And I am less, as an activist, I'm less concerned with what individual business does because I'm a small L libertarian. It's your business. And if you put a sign on your door that says, I don't want anybody with guns to come in this room, I'm cool. It's your business, and I can take my business elsewhere. The issue always to me is health officials who I did not vote for issuing edicts based on models that honest to God don't think they have the brains to understand.
Agreed.
And then say that, but if it's a business, absolutely 100%. Or your house, if you say, you know what, I'm in a high-risk group, and if you're going to come to my home, I'm going to ask you to do these things for me, to wear a mask, wash your hands, be very careful. I mean, I went to a dinner party at somebody's house the other night, and they had like big hand sanitizer things at the door, and then, right before you sit down at the table. Cool. Business, I believe that business has the same right as the individual.
I think Dr. Aprill has something.
Okay, Dr. Aprill. I couldn't see your hand because you're in New Orleans. You're so far south.
I think where we're at now just stresses and brings out a pretty fundamental tension between freedom from and freedom to. And if you look at those, really roughly, they map onto left and right. What I don't like from I would argue, libertarian right end of the spectrum is that people are now looking at this as a freedom to situation. I have the freedom not to wear a mask. I have the freedom to go wherever I want and do whatever. Well, that's not true. That's not respectful. And I think Janich is exactly right to point that out. This is, freedom to be a good citizen, freedom to be respectful. Otherwise, it becomes a kind of a bully boy freedom, which is a club, not a shield. That's not the point. I think if we're going to be stewards of liberty, then we need to be good stewards of liberty.
Very well put. Very well put. I did think we're here maybe 45 minutes in, something like that. And we talked a little earlier about certain stepping stones. We've seen things happen in the country in the last week, and certainly within the last 48 hours that are appalling in many ways, because they strike. Mob violence always strikes at the heart of the country. I've been in a number of riots as a journalist. I made my bones as a journalist being thrown in jail in riots. What's going on now? I mean, are there? I mean, not to tag it to COVID, but once again, Rob, this is something you addressed. The pressure cooker has been turned up, and it's not surprising when the pressure breaks out.
No, it's not. We've talked about it a lot. I think a lot of people in the personal defense, security, safety realm have talked about the potential effects of locking people down, taking away their jobs. There were periods of time in different parts of the country where there was rationing. I mean, it wasn't, one meat serving per person per week, but it was an inconvenience to go shopping for a family of 4 and be told you can only buy 2 packages of meat, and that was even in Florida. I know other places were a bit worse. So the idea that doesn't play into all of our tolerance for slight, our tolerance for being offended, our tolerance for being ridiculed, our tolerance for being threatened, our tolerance for anything negative, I believe has to be impacted by the fact that we're generally frustrated, that there's still anxiety about what the future holds for us, that there are people who are hungry, there are people who have crossed that line into petty crime, there are people who have had to sell things they didn't ever want to sell, there are people who are having to find a new job, work in jobs they never wanted to work in. There's a lot of angst, there's a lot of stress, and when that's like fumes. It's like the vapors coming off of a gas tank to me. And, that doesn't take much of a spark to explode. And I think that's what we're seeing now in Memphis, Los Angeles, and obviously in Minneapolis very specifically. And would that have happened anyway? Have there been riots in those places before? Absolutely. I think that after this, and I don't want to get into the issue with George Floyd. I think that it's obviously being investigated. It should be investigated. Many people inside of law enforcement are calling for it to be investigated. Regardless of what that match was or that spark was, I think this set off very quickly and escalated to a level that I haven't seen in Minneapolis recently. It certainly didn't get 4 or 5 years ago. There were issues after, I think it was Philando Castile, that killing, but we didn't see anything like what I woke up to seeing this morning on the news in Minneapolis, and it's carrying over to Memphis and Los Angeles and other places as well. And I really do think that the stress our nation is under plays a role there.
Dr. Aprill?
Well, there's a concept that's pretty important. We each have within us a reservoir of what we call distress tolerance. Exactly how much disquietude can we handle at any given moment? Well, our bandwidth is pretty well occupied at the moment. There's a lot going on, and when we lose this distress tolerance, our ability to have something shocking happen and be resilient to it is diminished. It is sort of a hair trigger person effect. And Minneapolis is obviously a city with a history of racial tension and police problems with the police-public relationship. But certainly nothing about the current situation is going to make that any less likely to get bad, and it is.
Mr. Janich?
I agree completely. I mean, it's when you look at just the overall tension that everyone is under, this is an unsettling time. And that ends up becoming kind of that underlying simmering that we're all dealing with. And when something that would potentially not normally set somebody off, when you're starting to simmer, going to a boil is a whole lot easier.
I grew up in Memphis, as you know, and I graduated from high school the year Dr. King was killed. And I broke curfew. We were under a doomsday curfew, and my friend and I broke curfew to go to the riot zone because we'd never seen a riot. And we saw one. I saw a Jeep-mounted M60 used on top of an apartment building to take out a sniper. It was enormously effective. And it damaged the city for the next 20, 30 years, maybe forever. The question is whether a city ever gets over any of that. But your thoughts, Mr. Seeklander, on what can we do to help? The five of us here, what we've been doing for almost 3 months, what do you think we can do to help here?
We'll go back to the R word, respect. People need to just respect other people. And I know we've been socially distanced, so that kind of, degrades that social herding effect where we tend to get together and shake hands and hug and rub elbows or whatever else. But that respect goes a long ways. And I think that if we were to give one message across the board, even the five of us, we all have different thoughts. We have different opinions. We've all dealt with this pandemic differently. We're to an extent living our lives differently. I have kids. Most of you don't have kids in the house anymore. Pincus has a small child. His child's different ages than mine, but we all have different opinions. We really do. Some of them, probably not a lot of them wildly different, but definitely different. But I think that across the board, we would agree that, respect and treating people like you want to be treated and doing the right thing, following some of these golden rules. I remember in the police academy, they said, here's the golden rules, do your very best each and every day, do the right thing each every day, treat us as you want to be treated. If you do those things as a police officer out in the public, you're going to do pretty darn good. And I think we could tell everybody listening right now to do those things. And if you do, it will reap benefits. And we need to accept, some of the things that Dr. Aprill talked about and everybody's talked about, that, there's got to be a little bit of a pressure cooker here, folks. And we're not even seeing all of it yet. What about when people that haven't paid their rent start to get eviction notices? What happens when, people that didn't get their stimulus checks or whatever realistically run out of money, or they can't pay the credit card bill? I think the pot's going to be simmering for a while. And boy, folks, we didn't talk about it in this show, but if next week or the following week, we start to see a big old spike of the COVID coming back, what happens then? You want to talk about simmer, go to boil quick, it's going to happen.
It will. And Dr. Aprill, I'd like your opinion on this. Again, we come back from a small L libertarian perspective, which I know you very much share. I always think I don't want understanding from other people. I want them respect would be the best option, but if they can't respect, just let it slide.
Well, here, I tend to slice that in a very particular way. We have no right to acceptance. You have no right to demand that I accept you or anything about you. You absolutely have a right to demand that I tolerate you. I acknowledge your fundamental right to exist, and your fundamental right to exist in a way that's very different from the way I would exist. You can demand tolerance and hold me accountable, but not acceptance. When you push me to accept, you require me to grind my will down until it passes through your filter, and I won't do that. And I think if we're all respectful of our abilities, respectful of our ability to ask for what we want, but also respect other people's judgment that maybe we're asking for a little too much when we ask for acceptance, and downshift our needs to tolerance. If we could guarantee tolerance, we wouldn't have to worry about acceptance.
What do you think, Mr. Pincus? I see your brow wrinkling.
No, I think it's spot on. I think the idea of tolerance that's the exact word that I was thinking of when you were postulating the question originally before Dr. Aprill used it. It is the right word. Now there comes a time where we can't tolerate things that are an affront to our principles, right? And that's where the grind comes. But I think we also have to really think about what our principles as opposed to preferences. We all have preferences and we all have opinions and we all have maybe narratives and maybe even agendas in some ways, but those aren't baseline principles. And people who truly believe in freedom and people who truly believe in liberty, and I've talked about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, with the "and" possibly being the most important word in that sentence. Not choosing just life, but what we have to come out and live, and we have to be free, that freedom, that liberty. We have to tolerate that in other people as well, and that's going to look different. And it may not sit well with our preferences, but our principles should include tolerance.
Mr. Janich, I think that's a really good point. What I tell people, because basically I'm an asshole, is I don't care what you do. I have preferences, as Rob said, but for the most part, I don't care what you do. It doesn't make any difference to me what you do, as long as it's not impinging, on me on a major point. And that sounds it sounds arrogant, but on the other hand, it actually works. There's that book, a very successful book recently, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And the book was hugely successful because when we talk about preferences, we worry too much about other people's preferences, as opposed to just saying, well, I mean, it's okay if he wants to marry a goat as long as the goat is consenting. Mr. Janich? I know you're very touchy about goats, but we're not going to go there, all right?
Again, you're back to preferences. You're back to very, and it's, it's like they say, he studied animal husbandry until they caught him at it one time. But, we talk about the word respect, we talk about tolerance, and, I think tolerance is a more appropriate word. Because it really, when you think about, again, everything that we're dealing with now, we don't have a good model for this. We don't have a good experience base to say, okay, well, this is just like this other thing that I lived through, and let me do the same things and I'll be okay. So like everything else in life, what we're trying to do is we're grasping at points of comparison, previous experiences. We're trying to make sense of it all based on that. But ultimately, what we're doing is we're kind of applying the principles of how do I deal with hardship? How do I deal with challenge? So when you asked earlier, what can the five of us do? I think one of the things we've done consistently throughout this whole series is we've looked at this as a threat, because it is. And we all, because of our focus on self-defense, because of our focus on personal safety, personal security, we evaluate threats, we understand threats, and we teach people how to deal with those threats. And we do it on a principle-based model, because what we do is we say you can't be prepared for every specific incident. So what you do is you have a good solid skill set, you have a good solid decision-making process, you have a commitment to awareness and avoidance, and you apply all these things conceptually so you can deal with dynamic situations and do it well. That's essentially what we're doing here. And the same thing applies, just like when we talk about self-defense. The ultimate goal is not to win a fight. The ultimate goal is not to get shots on target or to beat somebody's ass or anything like that. It's to go home safe. The ultimate goal here is to be alive and to have your loved ones be alive. So what you're trying to do is to take all these same principles and say, I want to be well informed. I want to listen to the best information I can possibly do. I want to evaluate my situation. I want to evaluate the situations of my loved ones. I want to evaluate the situation around me. And then I want to make the best use of my resources and tools to be as safe as I possibly can. And in the process, in the end, again, I don't have to be concerned with what the guy across the street does, what this guy in the parking lot does, or anything else. I want to go home safe.
Very good point. Dr. Aprill?
I think also, the fact that this is rooted in a biological problem and in a real existential threat helps us grasp the importance of the distinction between tolerance and acceptance, because it gets us back in the existential framework and lets us look at existential concerns as really existential and recalibrates the bar. When I mean something that I cannot tolerate, to get to Rob's point, that means something that is such an affront that I would pick up a rifle to make it stop. Well, I'm not going to do that over ketchup versus mustard or pronoun. If you would pick up a rifle to do away with the problem, that's an existential threat, and that's something that we cannot tolerate. That's a violation of fundamental principles. Well, that's just about nothing. There are very few things that meet that bar, and very few things that should meet that bar.
So if you were in a grocery store, say, Mr. Seeklander, let's say you go to Whole Foods, although the very idea of Seeklander and Whole Foods is terrifying. But somebody there is wearing a mask or not wearing a mask. Maybe rather than you challenging them, what you should say is like, instead of this bandana that I got from, say, Ruger, along with my last gun, maybe I should be wearing an N95 mask instead of saying I'm going to challenge that person on it. Maybe I need to say, what do I need to do to make myself safer in a universe where that person is not wearing a mask? Bring it back to you personally, to those things that you have direct control over.
Yeah, I think that's the key, is control what you can control, and maybe, someone said it earlier, chill about the things that you can't control. And there's never been a reason not to communicate to other humans, assuming you're doing the distance of 6 feet and socially distancing, and educating someone on the fact that what they may be wearing or doing is inappropriate. I think we will see future challenges on this mask thing. Hey, you're not wearing a mask, I'm offended. I think we're already seeing that. I haven't personally dealt with that. But at the same time, though, it's weird. I really think it depends kind of where you are and where you live. There are a lot of people out here where I am wearing masks, and there are a lot of people that aren't wearing masks. But ultimately, it's up to the individual to make the decision to protect themselves and their family members as good as they possibly could. And to take it all the way back to one of your initial questions when I had a little bit of a rant, am I going to go to a grocery store and get into a altercation over a mask if I choose not to wear one that day? No, I'm not. I will kindly and respectfully leave. But then again, that's a principle. That's a principle we taught on the TV show The Best Defense for years. It's a principle I teach my family. We avoid conflict. I talked about a small potential conflict with a neighbor at one point in time. We avoided that. I verbally let that individual know that it wouldn't work out that night, but then we avoided the conflict. We continue. So that would be a good piece of advice for people to follow too. We don't need to get into an escalating fight where a gun pops out of a holster accidentally because we're defending our right to be in a store when someone is pissed off we should wear a mask. Go avoid. Andrew Branca, certainly talks a lot about, hey, the best fight is the one you can avoid. So think about that.
Mr. Pincus?
Yeah, I think that it's important to go back to what Dr. Aprill said about the freedom to. Combine that with the avoidance and the de-escalation principle, and if you're in a town where 80%, 75%, 51%, maybe 30%, but at that store 80% of the people are wearing a mask, wear a mask. Wear a face cover. And if that compromises your principles, I want to know what those principles are, because if your principle is freedom and liberty, and if your principle is personal safety, and your principle is avoiding fights instead of creating fights, then wearing the mask might be the way to actually avoid conflict, to de-escalate any potential angst, and to go through your life without having to worry about it. I think it's interesting that there's this meme, or there's a couple different memes going around in the gun community that basically say, oh, you're wearing a mask even though it may not do anything, but you have it just in case it's doing something, kind of like I carry a gun. Do you get it now? That's the way people are meaning it to anti-gunners or pro-gun control people. But the irony is that the exact same argument, the exact same meme should be resonating with the person who carries the gun and has a lower chance of ever needing to use that gun than they do of getting coronavirus at this point. And yet they don't understand that wearing the mask, it's very little effort, and it might be saving your life. It might be saving somebody else's life, and it might be keeping you out of conflicts that as you go through the day in this current society we're living in today. I just don't get the angst over wearing the mask when you factor all those things in, especially when we're the kind of people that are already carrying flashlights and medical kits, thinking about where we go, how we move, how to avoid conflict, and we're carrying the gun. Dr.
Aprill?
It is amazing that, the perceived redundancy or unnecessary nature of a health and safety measure depends very much on whose ox is gored, right? If you look at the numbers, a lot of it wouldn't seem necessary, and yet we're making risk assessments. And they should be personal, and they should be as well grounded as we can get them, but that means we have to live by them too. And if we're going to use that logic to get where we want to go, we have to recognize when it's used against a position that we would favor.
Boy, I hate it when you say that you should walk your talk. Damn it! What's wrong with you, Aprill? Janich, as we're coming to the end here, we've kind of been going, blathering about an hour. I feel like we accomplished what we set out to accomplish when we stated in the first show. We have given information that I think has not been available widely. I don't know about you guys. I've received emails and messages, contacts from even from epidemiologists that I know, to say you did good. All of you did good, because I like to think we have been a voice of reason, and then as we come back again in July, that will continue. So let's do one more roundabout. Mr. Janich.
I think you're right. I'm proud to have been part of the roundtable, and I think we did accomplish our goal. And I think in doing that, what we each tried to do was to seek out good information based on the resources that we have. In some cases, we have resources that the average person might not. We try to relate to our personal experiences, like Rob with his travels and everything. And we tried to share, I think, more than just information, the thought process behind it, to get people to think rationally, to think logically, to not buy into hype, and to really, I think what we tried to do as instructors, we tried to set a standard with regard to the thought process of addressing this challenge. And I think that's what I'm really most proud of. And that's what we do best, is to essentially set that standard and get people to think for themselves, and to sort things out for themselves based on their individual needs.
Mr. Seeklander.
First of all, if anybody's wondering, I think that Scotch or bourbon whiskey will both work. They both kill the COVID, number one. But three things, like I said, I said them earlier, but they resonate because I think they mean something. Do the right thing, whatever that is. Do your very best every day, and treat others like you want to be treated. I think that's super important with what we're coming into in the summer and the heat. Man, treat others as you want to be treated. I know William Aprill talked about the traffic, so we're all going to get all pissy. There's a traffic. There's a line at the restaurant now. There never used to be anybody here. A lot of little things are going to set us off. So treat everybody exactly like you want to be treated. And I know that's a hard talk to walk, or walk to talk. That's hard to do. So think about that. Think about how you can do that in your day-to-day life with your family members and anybody you see in the community. If we do that, that's going to go a long ways.
Dr. Aprill?
I think what we've all tried to do and model for people is to address this kind of problem at all three levels of operation. The micro level, me and what I need, and what the people important to me need. The meso level, right? Let's say the community level, and then the macro level, the societal level, and not confusing the three, not letting my notions about what's good in the big picture, let's say politically or economically, drive my micro processing. And so keeping the perspective to keep those three levels separate and operate in all three as much as we can. I think that's the goal, is to having a fulsome response that doesn't just become a series of knee-jerk reactions. And I'm proud of us, because I think, frankly, we've done a pretty good job of that.
Mr. Pincus, last word.
Thank you. Thank you guys for helping me with my thought processes. I've learned and gained insight from all of you guys. You've helped me to flesh out my own behaviors and maybe understand them better, because I've had to explain them to you, or they've been challenged by some of the things you guys have said. Thank you to the audience for the same thing, because while it's great to get those, hey, this really helped me and you guys are awesome, and I'm glad to see you guys all back together. I've also gotten some emails that were challenging or questioning, or, hey, what did you mean by that? Can you get a little deeper into that? Or even challenging the fact that I have been traveling around, which I think some people have seen as potentially reckless or dangerous. But does that really jive with, what it is I'm selling as far as personal defense? And so it's been really valuable, rewarding. I am proud of it. And again, I look forward to what we're going to do in July, but I'm really proud of putting a cap on the last couple of months, because I think this was valuable for me. I know it was, and for other people, I hope it was valuable for you guys too.
Oh, thanks all of you, because I think, I love working with you guys. And from a personal standpoint, these roundtables have helped anchored me a little. It's no secret I have a vicious temper. You can read about it in numerous places on the internet, but it's great working with people who are so thoughtful and so level-headed and so knowledgeable and so willing to step outside of their own comfort zones. So for all of you who've been watching us on the Roundtable, on the Best Defense Survival Roundtable, thank you for being a part of this. And I hope, and I think I speak for all of us, that we have made your lives a little better or a little easier during what has been a really, really miserable 3 months. I'm Michael Bane. Thank you. Rob Pincus, Michael Janich, Mike Seeklander, Dr. William Aprill. We will see you in July with the Best Defense, and have a good summer. Go to the beach, respect other people.